Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm Jonathan Haupt. I'm the Executive Director of the nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center here in Beaufort, South Carolina. Welcome to our 5th annual and first virtual Pat Conroy Literary Festival. This is a little different this year, but we've adapted, and we're very grateful to have all of you with us here in the Zoom room, and those of you watching on Facebook or YouTube as well. My guest this afternoon is appearing not only as part of our literary festival, but also as the author keynote presenter for the Friends of South Carolina Libraries annual conference, which is going on right now, live streaming here from Beaufort as well. So I get to have a conversation, and you all can join in via the chat with your questions as well, with Brad Taylor, New York Times bestselling novelist of the Pike Logan series. Brad was born in Okinawa, Japan, grew up in what was at that point rural Texas, perhaps is a little less rural.
Outskirts of Houston.
Outskirts of Houston, yes. Brad graduated from the University of Texas. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army Infantry and served for more than 21 years, retiring as Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel and held numerous positions, but ended his career in the Army as part of 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, more commonly known as Delta Force, something we'll talk a little bit about in our conversation here. His final assignment was a little closer to where we are right now, actually. He was assistant professor of military science at Citadel in Charleston, and Brad published his first novel with us in a massive paperback edition, and it's 11,000 printing, One Rough Man, in 2011. So you've been at the writing life for about 10 years now.
Yeah, right about on it.
Yeah. Book number 15 in the Pike Logan series, American Trader, comes out next year. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. Of the 14 books in existence, more than 2 million copies have sold internationally, I assume, multiple editions. And Brad now makes his home in Charleston as well, where he's joined us very graciously today here in Beaufort. So welcome back to the set.
Thank you.
River.
Thank you for having me.
Incidentally, your episode By the River appears next week, next Thursday in the lineup. So people will get to watch you on this very set almost a week from today on the show as well.
Good.
So I want to talk to you about a couple different aspects of your life from the perspective of our literary festival, but also for the sake of folks who are joining from the Friends of South Carolina Libraries as well, because both of those things are lenses through which we can talk to you not only about your writing life, but your reading life as well. So let's go back to the beginning, or as close to the beginning as we can get, and talk about when you first thought that maybe you would become a writer. What drew you to books and stories and literature?
I think I always had in my head forever that I was going to write a book. As a child, I was an absolutely voracious reader. Went through, every phase there is. Ray Bradbury phase, Stephen King phase, Piers Anthony phase, fantasy, science fiction, murder mysteries, and just read. And it was never at any point in my head. I just kind of always said to myself, one day I'm going to write a book. And actually, the first book, when I wrote One Rough Man, I didn't actually think it was going to go anywhere. I was going to just, I wanted to write a book. And I thought I'd sit on the bedside table, and my mom would say, that's a really good book, right? And that'd be the end of that.
Yes.
So nobody's more surprised than me when it sold.
But nobody gets an agent by accident, so at some point you must have had some ambition that this
I did.
had a life to it.
I guess it's, I'll be honest with you, but I know how hard it is to get published, so I probably never would have tried. But I was really naive. I was an Army guy. I didn't know anything about publishing. I just came from the unit, and I said, well, I did that, I do this, let's go find an agent. And, so I had to learn how to write, basically. I haven't had any formal instruction in writing, except for reading. Reading is, all the other authors taught me how to write. So what I set out to do was write a book that I would like to read. And I read some books, and I was like, okay, I pick and choose. I like how this works. For instance, I get asked occasionally, when Pike Logan's on the screen, he's in first person. And then when it's somebody else, he's in third person. And apparently you're not supposed to do that. I get asked all the time, how did you know to mix up first and third person? And I said, well, I didn't know that was a rule. If I didn't know that was a rule, I wouldn't have done it. But I know a lot of authors do. Nelson DeMille, the John Corey Plum Island books, he does it. Joseph Fender does it. There's a lot of people who have done it. And I like how that looked, and said, okay, I'm going to do that.
It's a good literary technique because it brings you into the immediacy of your protagonist when you need to be there.
Right.
And you can be removed from that when you need that.
Well, I actually wrote One Rough Man completely in third person. we started. I went back and rewrote the entire thing.
Yeah.
With every time he's on the page, which is the first person, which obviously is a lot of work, but it worked a lot better for that precise reader. I could get into his head and show the reader what he's feeling.
Well, you have this cast of characters you're working with too, so other perspectives are very important for the task force and Jennifer Gable certainly as well. So being able to sort of go where the moment is, where the character is really handy to the way that you write, and you do it wonderfully well too. I always feel like I'm in the right set of eyes and the right head that I need to be in that moment. And very often, I think that's where movies about teams, whether it's the Magnificent Seven or it's an army unit or whatever, sort of go wrong. They want to show you everything all at once, so you don't actually feel the sense of risk that any one character has. But you do that so well. We always so concerned for the character that we're with.
Sometimes it's really hard to do because sometimes I'll ship POVs in the same fight. Mm-hmm. So Jennifer and Pike are in a fight scene, and when Pike's fighting, he's in first person. But I can't have Pike looking over at Jennifer and then describing what's happening with Jennifer. I need to be in her head. And so I'll shift right over that. Mm-hmm. And getting that seamlessly is kind of hard to do sometimes. You don't want to be a real jerk. You're in your mind's eye. I want a person to not be. I don't want somebody looking at the car wreck as it happens. Mm-hmm. I want them in the car as that wreck. So.
And those are all techniques you picked up first and foremost as a reader, liking those things when you encounter them in other writers.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you still read that voraciously? Are you still reading in every genre?
No. I just run out, especially in the military, I just kind of ran out of time. Everybody had, people talk about grunts, infantry guys as, being stupid or something. I never met a grunt that didn't have a paperback in his cargo bomb. In fact, I still buy paperbacks because it's well fit in cargo bomb. So when you're on deployment and things like that, you have a lot of time to read. But then once I started teaching and started writing my own stuff, it's really hard to find time to read. In fact, I've got a stack of to-be-read books on my bedside table. I'm like, I'm going to read that. And I see it on my bedside table still. I'm like, still haven't gotten it.
Yes. A good to-be-read file will give you the sense of guilt you need as a reader every so often, too. What would have been the paperback most likely to have been in your cargo pocket when you were overseas? What were you reading?
Murder mysteries, believe it or not. People ask if I read my own genre, and I don't because I'm living. I don't read somebody else writing about it. So I read John Sanford, Robert Grace, all those guys, Mike Conley. In fact, I just read the latest John Sanford finishing yesterday.
So even though they're in a different genre, they have some sort of temperamental comparisons to the genre that you're in.
Well, there's also, you can learn a lot just by the way that you pacing, the way to do the mystery of the book itself. And I try to do that in my notes. So, this is kind of, you're going to have to figure this out as it goes along. Sometimes the thriller through just bad guy exits into page one, he's got a nuclear bomb. Now the rest of the book is trying to stop him. I tend to write bad guy exits here, but I'm going to what he's doing. What's going on here. No Fortunate Son kind of really went all the way through. It was a kidnapping type thing, hostage scenario. And nobody knows who's kidnapping, nobody knows why they're kidnapping. And the reader kind of picks it up as they're going along. Hints here and there, breadcrumbs about what's going on here, and eventually, 2/3 of the way in, it kind of unravels and you know what's going on.
Gives a sense of investigation or discovery, at least.
Yeah. Kind of plot that's because I love reading mysteries, so I'm stealing from them too.
The writer always knows it to steal from. That's a good instinct. But as a writer, do you know the solution to the mystery, or are you discovering it in the course of writing it?
We were just talking about No Fortunate Son. Before No Fortunate Son, I would have told you that I knew it 100% of the time. No Fortunate Son had changed. So now it's about 80% of the time. I mean, I think I know. I never set out and just say, well, it'll all come to me, hopefully. I mean, in my head, I knew how it's going to end. And then when I get to a certain point in the book, I'm like, that doesn't work. I need to end it this way. And sometimes it works out really well. And Ring of Fire, the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, which is a position we had that came after 9/11, he's going through the whole book and doing everything. He's a good guy. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to make him a bad guy. And he then became a mole halfway through the book. I didn't plan it that way. So I'm sure the reader gets to it. It's a shock to them, but it's kind of a shock to me. It's like I need another piece to tie in the other bad guys to ramp up the stakes a little bit. So I used him to be a mole.
So you discovered what the reader as you went along.
Right.
Therefore, the reader can't sense it's coming because you as the writer.
I certainly did, no. And I did it because, when I was going through the book, I was like, there's a piece missing here. Something is not connecting. Because the DNI is a big organization, CIA is underneath them and all that. And I wanted to make sure that this apparatus was going this way to solve the plot of what's happening, including the task force. But I needed something that would stymie the task force. And I was like, okay, that DNI, he's not right on the task force, but he is going to be working with the Russians to stop whoever's, that he knows somebody's out there, he just doesn't know who it is. And so that's why I kind of flipped him.
That's a scenario, a challenge that I think you've given yourself with this series and this character as well. That these guys are incredibly good at what they do. So to create a sense of risk, the bad guys have to be very impressive as well, too. There has to be numerous challenges, not just one challenge, but numerous challenges to overcome.
Yeah, and actually, I try to show that on the page. Too often, like Hollywood, there is no moral ambiguity. It's if these guys would get off my back and let me use that drill bit on this guy's knee, I'd save the planet. Well, combat doesn't actually work that way. The guy's knee you're about to drill, you don't know for a fact unless he's Bin Laden. Is he bad or is he not bad? I mean, you have some suspicions, but you don't know. And you make decisions in combat all the time. Some of them are good and some of them are bad. And you're going to live with those decisions. So not every decision you make is going to be the correct decision. And so I try to show that on the page. Pike's human. He's going to make some bad calls that sometimes are catastrophic. Sometimes it's just like he could have solved the problem right here. But he made a call to do this, and therefore these guys got away. And that's just when life is. That's what happens.
Actions and inactions both have consequences, and it's true on the page as it is anywhere else. Where did Pike come from? You mentioned you always wanted to write a book. At what point did you decide you were going to write a book about that was set in the world you had been living in and operating in with this kind of character?
Yeah, he's kind of amalgamation of people I've served with. I'm not Pike Logan people. I think
that's such a Pike Logan thing to say, though.
I guarantee it. It's very hard to get to the level of special operations that I was at. It's hard to do. But what I usually tell people is it's like the PGA Tour. There's probably 1% on the planet that can play on the PGA Tour. You just don't have the skill set to play on the PGA Tour. There's Tiger Woods, which everybody knows, and there's a guy who's 100th on the money list that nobody's over. Well, he's playing on the PGA Tour. I'm 100th on the money list. Pike Logan is Tiger Woods. He exists, but it's not me.
What did you create sort of counterbalance?
Yeah, very good. And actually, I want to write a story of redemption. That's the whole story. And, I want to know the person who comes up with right what you got. If I'd have been a police officer, I'd have been a cop. If I'd have been a priest, I would have been a nun. Both would have been there. The same redemptive themes would have been in the book. I would be a counter-terrorist special forces guy, so that's what Pike became. But Jennifer was there from the very beginning as a counterbalance to him and the whole redemptive thing.
Does the fact that Jennifer gets more or less equal play in the book, is that reflected in your readership? Do you have both male and female readers?
I definitely do. In fact, it's probably 45% female, 55% male. But I'm not sure they're reading for Jennifer, so to speak.
No, perhaps not. They would certainly have the reasons to read for Pike as well.
Right. So I got a bunch of them tweeting me all the time about Knuckles, because he's single and good-looking guy. So.
Well, speaking of Knuckles and the rest of the task force, did they come out of your own experiences? Are these based on folks that you worked with or interact with? Or are they?
Any of the books I've written, that it's somebody that I was like, I'm going to put him in a book and I'll change his name. It's nothing like that. I just know the skill sets of various organizations, how they would come into this and what they would do. For instance, Knuckles is a SEAL. I'm not a SEAL, but I've worked with a bunch of SEALs, so I know what they would do. Brett used to be a Force Recon Marine. Now he's a paramilitary officer in the CIA. I mean, I've worked with those guys, so it's kind of building a team of what I knew would come to play.
There are other folks in the military thriller genre, other writers who did not serve, who don't bring the expertise to this that you do. And they go out and they do the research and they know who to call, or they find out who to call to sort of serve as consultants and readers. Do you feel you've got an advantage having actually come out of this world, that you're pulling from your own not only your own perspective, but your own personal connections as well to write these books.
Well, yeah, I would say I definitely have an advantage. I don't think it's not a critical advantage. It certainly doesn't mean I'm writing any better. And people ask me, I do writing conferences all the time. They say, how do I write about the military? And my advice to them every single time is less is more. People want to do so much research, they get everything wired exactly right, and invariably they're going to get it wrong. It just they can't. There's no way they can get it right. There's too much stuff to that. But if you just lightly touch on it, then I can fill in the blanks myself. I'll formulate what I know about the military going there. For instance, Rambo. What do you know about Rambo?
What do I know about Rambo? The character, the movie?
Just the book, David Morrell's first book.
Yes, fine book. Yeah, First Blood.
What do you know about Rambo?
So he's part Native American. He's returned Vietnam.
Military guys.
Yes,
He was in Special Forces.
was he? Okay.
That's all you know.
Right.
He won the Congressional Honor, but he was in Special Forces. And some people will say, okay, if he's in Special Forces, I'm going to put him on ODA 80035 in Dak Tao province. And they go through all this, and then it's like, you're going to get something wrong there if you do that. So,
but if you're more open-ended about it, then you're relying on the
Special
reader.
Forces, and that's all I really need to know. Now, if you need something out of it, if it's EOD guy who's in defuse a bomb, you probably got to get more specific on what his skill set is. But invariably, I'll have someone ask me, "Is this correct? Is this correct?" And it's like, "No, it's not correct." Well, why are you even saying it? Just say he's, if you need to neck it down to an area, okay, he's in first group at Fort Lewis, Washington, D&E Saddle. Why do you need to go all the way down to the ODAs and the company and all that? It's not very necessary.
Have you had an experience where someone in active duty or even a vet sort of calls into question the facts of a book like that, or have you sort of given yourself the freedom to kind of let them be what they are without going so deeply that you get stuck in something like that?
Well, I created the task force as a completely fictional thing. We had nothing like that. I get asked that all the time. I purposely didn't want anybody to say that I was writing about real units and all fiction. So I made something that anybody who'd actually served in any area that I had, I don't care if it's the intelligence world or special operations world, they would all say, that's crazy. I'd love to be in it. We were all like, that's kind of our fantasy. We'd love to have an organization like Task Force, but it doesn't exist. So I can kind of make up what I want to do. I've never been correct on military stuff. Mainly because the military stuff is kind of hard for me to correct. I have copy editors that correct me sometimes. So I'm like, really? You're going to correct that? No, leave it alone. That's the way it's going to be. But I do get corrected all the time. I have to do a ton of research for just about everything. When you make a mistake, you're going to find out. So, for instance, in One Rough Man, Pike carjacks a Chevy Cutlass. Now, I know how to carjack a car, so that all went perfectly. And can I get the emails? Hey, Oldsmobile makes a Cutlass. It's not a Chevy Cutlass. There's no such thing.
So they called you out on that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I had Knuckles is the cat, is the only character in my novels that has gone transgender. Because I was a male calico cat, and I got a ton of emails. There's no such thing as a male calico. I had a calico cat, but it was female. And so I made him male, so I call it Knuckles. And then I got all these emails saying that that's no such thing. Calico cats are all females.
Yes.
So the next book, the cat became female.
Adjusted accordingly.
Yes.
I wonder about that too, about being 15 books into this sort of world building, this universe building, where first book in you can make up anything you want, but now over time you're committed to the continuity that you've set up. Do you feel a bit restrained by that, or is that?
Yes, and you're exactly right. You write your first book, and the universe is wide open. The minute I say someone has blue eyes, he's got blue eyes forever. The minute I create the biggest problem I had was I created a task force, like I said, just made it fictional. But I knew it would have oversight. I knew it would have left and right limits. I knew the boundaries of how they would use this organization. So I built it that way. And you have to, whatever the target is, has to be on the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation by the State Department. We have all these rules and stuff in the real world. And then in the next book, I'm like, oh, why did I do that? I want them to go over and do this now, but I've already created this organization. And another part of the continuity is remembering what you did. So, and the readers will let you know. So once again, your fortunate son, Kurt Hale's the commander of the task force, and his niece, who he loves like a daughter, has been kidnapped. And he's a bachelor, and that's why he dotes on his niece and blah, blah, blah. Great book. But then I get the email, what happened to Kurt's wife? He's like, what are you talking about his wife? So I could go back to One Rough Man. There's one sentence in that entire book that says, I've got a date night with my wife tonight I can't miss. Don't interrupt me. And that's its only mentions ever. So I had to create a whole thing about her. She was working at an orphanage and caught on fire. And my wife
happens between books, I guess.
So my wife actually told me she was reading, the edits of it, and she said, "I'm pretty sure Kurt Hale's married." And I was like, "No, he's not. I'm writing these books. I know he's not married." And then he was, and so he was all 30 now.
That's good, though. I think that reflects well that you have readers who pay that much attention to the page, that they're that invested in these characters and their lives, that they'll notice something that's seemingly small, but they're very drawn to them.
That's a good email right off the bat. And, I'm very polite back to him. In between the books, she got hit by a bus.
You mentioned editing and readers a couple of times, and that leads me to another question I had too. Is there any sort of vetting on the part of the military for these books before they're released? Is that part of your arrangement?
Well, there's kind of a yes and a no to that. Technically, I have a non-disclosure agreement, but the non-disclosure agreement is I am not allowed to write anything of any activities that I have done, non-fiction, basically all non-fiction.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to say something about operations in Syria to this day, since I worked in Iraq, I can talk about Syria pretty smartly. I can't do that without getting them to clear, because that's just the non-disclosure agreement. But fiction is not that way. And if you think about it, I mean, when would that end? So if I wrote a science fiction book, do they have to read that because I was in the military? Mm-hmm. If I wrote a gardening book, does that have to get cleared because I was in the military? Mm-hmm. So there's left and right limits. But having said that, when No Easy Day came out, which was the Osama bin Laden kit, he didn't get that cleared. And SOCOM, Special Operations Command, really went crazy over that. So anybody who's written a book, you got called in and scrubbed. And I came on a clean bill of health. There's no classified in the books. But, so they have been reviewed, but they don't. There's not any reason for me to submit it.
Gotcha.
Because it's pure fiction. And I make sure that everything in there is absolutely, it's, like I said, the task force doesn't exist. So,
so that's giving you a lot of freedom, really, to go into this. But you're very committed to getting the facts from the ground correctly, to the point where you go everywhere that Pike goes, that you can go and do field research too. Has that been true throughout all 15 books? Is that something you...
except for One Rough Man, I wrote about places I had recently been to while I was in the military. So I didn't make a specific trip for book research for One Rough Man. But the rest of them I did. Although All Necessary Force, the research, I took a bunch of cadets over to Egypt. So while we were over in Egypt with the cadets, I was doing book research as well. But after that, I definitely got on the ground. Enemy of Mine, I went to Dubai and Qatar and just all over. Hunter Killer, we went down to Brazil, and I spent, from one end of that country to the other, from the Amazon down to Sao Paulo to Rio to Manaus to Salvador, all over the place doing research. And it's because if I wish I could just write without having to do that. But for me personally, there's always something that I find on the ground that I couldn't possibly find just by looking at Google Earth. And it'll jump out at me while I'm on the ground there. I'm like, hey, that's perfect for this X scene or whatever. And I'll end up, if I hadn't gone there, I wouldn't know it was there, and I wouldn't be able to use it.
So there's a sense of real discovery, not just in the sense of the characters, but for you as writers.
Well, there's a lot, and most of it ends up in the book. The most famous one, I was in Lesotho, Africa, and it's for Operator Downs 3 books ago, I think it was. And the book's a coup of Lesotho. And so I'm researching a coup, which means I'm not doing any touristy stuff. I'm looking at the parliament buildings, I'm looking at the television stations, I'm looking at the police station, and the military barracks, which are the ones going to do the coup, their version of special forces. And so I tried to get on the base and just to bowl my way in and say, hey, my name's Brad Taylor, I'm in the military. I used to be in the military, and I love going to see military bases. Can I come on? And 2 SUVs rolled up, and I got on the base. They thought I was an American spy. And there was a lot of background about Lesotho that I didn't know. You're not going to find on Google that was going on between the United States and their government. The police were against the military. There was a lot of stuff going on there, which I found out under interrogation with these guys. And all that ended up in the book. So,
well, no point wasting that experience.
Exactly.
Yes. I wonder, I'm actually surprised that's not a bigger challenge for you with your background to get a visa and access as a former military operative. who is doing research for a novel. That sort of seems like a cover story to begin with. But
Well,
here you
don't
come.
tell anybody that. I never, in fact, when I was in there getting interrogated with those guys, I never, thank goodness they didn't Google me. Because if they'd seen my bio, I'd probably still be there. I told them, I always say I'm just a tourist. I'm not doing it. In fact, I ended up in Morocco. It was the first time I said, you're exiting, going into Morocco. They said, what do you do for a living? I said, I'm a writer. I exited the ferry. We came from Spain over to Morocco on a ferry. And as I'm walking out to get my bags, these three guys ran up to me and says, what do you mean you're a writer? And so I write books. Goes, are you writing magazine articles about Morocco? Because apparently you have to have a handler if you're going to write about Morocco. I said, no, they're just books. They're just fiction books. And he's like, okay, you can go. So from then on, I was like, I'm not telling anybody I'm a writer.
Lesson learned for that, I guess, as well. Yeah. We've got some questions in the chat, which I'm going to turn to in just a second here. There are two things we kind of touched on that I want to circle back around before we do that. And that's the idea of Pike Logan as moral character, of sort of dealing with these moral quandaries. And it's certainly a big part of what happens in Hunter-Killer, this whole notion of vengeance versus justice, what is sort of combat-oriented versus what crosses the line and becomes a crime, and sort of what side of this is Pike going to be on, because he certainly has reasons for considering very dramatic action in this book, and will be protective of the plot, not give any of that away. But have you always sort of seen Pike at this moment where he's the kind of guy who could go either way if pushed, and you've got to write him through, you've got to write him down the middle of the path? Or is this the nature of each book that you create these circumstances?
It's much more pronounced in Hunter-Killer than the other one. So Pike started out that actually in One Rough Man, he's a little bit worse than he is in Hunter-Killer. And he's kind of going back to, his moral compass is broken. I mean, he's a deadly guy, and now he has nothing reining at him. And that goes through all the way up to the books. He gets better and better and better. And Jennifer's kind of helping him along with that. And she's turning more gray than he is, because she starts out completely black and white. It's there's two things. There's Immanuel Kant had a thing called categorical imperatives, the philosopher. Yeah, sure. So some things are wrong or right just by the action itself. There's always wrong or right. For instance, the Citadel, the cadet will not lie, cheat, or steal. That's a categorical imperative. It doesn't say you can steal a loaf of bread because there's a starving baby. It says you won't steal, period.
It's a universal truth.
Universal thing. The 10 Commandments are
it's an abridged, the Citadel Honor Code is effectively an abridged version of the Ten Commandments.
And it's a categorical imperative. It's thou shalt not kill. It's not thou shalt not kill anytime you're doing something else. It's just you won't kill. Whereas John Stuart Mill had the utilitarianism, which is the action in and of itself is based on the outcome. Is there a greater good that comes out of that action? And that's kind of duality. Pike's definitely a greater good guy. Jennifer was more Immanuel Kant. And now she's kind of blended in, saying, okay, I can see there's some greater good coming out of this. Even if what I'm doing is bad, there's some greater good that's coming out of it. So.
Did you set down to write that into Hunter-Killer, or did that sort of present itself as you go? Because it is very pronounced in that novel, and it adds another level. It's a very literary sort of thing to approach. It goes above and beyond any limitations of the genre of the novel. That we're getting sort of deep philosophical argument.
And I did set out to do that. It was kind of hard to do because you don't want to go overboard. I mean, at some points, someone would get turned off from Pike Logan and go, "That guy's just a bully. He's just running around. I don't care what his justification is. That's just heinous." But on the other hand, you also want to show that in novels and movies and stuff, we're kind of immune to the violence. It'd be just like, I'd kill that guy right there. Well, in real life, you probably wouldn't kill that guy right there. And so I want to make sure the balance is there and it's correct. And it's just not going to, there's not murderous mayhem going on, unless they're bad guys. And the bad guys will do all kind of things. You definitely want them to be bad. But they've got to be three-dimensional as well. They can't just be Dr. Evil. I have never met a terrorist that didn't think he was doing the right thing. I mean, you sit across from those guys and go, why in the world is he murdering everybody? He seems so normal. He thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, understanding those motives, that mindset, the backstory is very important too.
Which is that the guy in Hunter-Killer, the Russian there, he's definitely got that huge backstory from working in Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. He's trying to prove himself again.
Yeah, it's a very nuanced portrayal of that character too. It's all very well handled in that book. I enjoyed it immensely. And I'm looking forward to American Traitor, which I told you just before we began here that I now get to review for the Post.
Yeah, I appreciate
show. Can you give us just a little preview of what's going on in the world of Pike Logan?
Yeah, this actually, I told you about Lesotho. While I was over there looking at the Parliament buildings and things like that, they're all brand new. and there was a bunch of Chinese lettering on there, which I'm assuming says, be sure to wear a hard hat because they're still doing construction. And so I asked the guy I was with, why is the Chinese lettering here? And he said, oh, Chinese are doing this for free. They're just doing it because they want to be good. And I was like, I don't think they're doing it to be good. And that was the first time I'd run into what they call their Belt and Road Initiative. It didn't factor into operator down, so I ignored it. Well, then I read a book on artificial intelligence, the competition between the Chinese and Americans. And then the Taiwan Strait started bubbling up. We're selling them arms, and they're rattling sabers against mainland China. China is definitely rattling sabers with them. The Hong Kong stuff came up, and all that was bubbling into, I said, there's a story here involving artificial intelligence, deep fake videos, China's global ambitions in the South China Sea with the Spratly Islands. They're trying to do all that with the Belt and Road Initiative is kind of a loan shark thing where they'll come into a country and say, we'll give you this massive loan to build this port. And if you can't pay the loan back, we're just going to take the port. And so they're kind of doing that all over the world, spreading their influence. And that's kind of where the genesis of the book came from.
Has that been sort of the process for finding the problem to be solved in the earlier novels as well? It's you sort of watching the world and saying, if Pike Logan and the task force existed, that's who would be called in to address this.
It is. And usually it's some obscure news story that doesn't really make the news. For instance, the widow strike, which is about a pandemic, perfect for now.
Unfortunately timely now.
Written a long time ago. There was an article where bird flu is H5N1, avian flu, is very, very deadly. It's more deadly than coronavirus, much more deadly. It's like a 40% kill rate. But it can't be transferred human to human. It's not airborne. It's just people are cutting into birds and stuff, and they get the flu, and then they die. But everybody's petrified. If it mutates and goes airborne, it's going to wipe out the Earth. And so I did a ton of research on that, and these guys were doing, in order to prevent the end of the Earth, they mutated the virus, turned it into an airborne virus, and were transmitted between ferrets and killing the ferrets over airborne in order to look at how to make a vaccine. Well, then they said they were going to post all their results on, I think it was a journal Nature. And we have an advisory scientific board, which, believe it or not, Dr. Fauci's in charge of. Nobody had ever heard of him back then. But the advisory board said, you can't put that in open source. You're basically giving everybody a weapon. And there was a huge fight about it. And so they didn't publish their stuff. And that story came out, and I was like, there's a plot right there.
There it is.
And so that's where that book came from.
This is the riskiest thing we're going to do. We're going to go into the chat room and see what kind of questions we have. Looks like potentially quite a few of them. If they're all about your jacket, I'm going to be disappointed. Although I do have questions about your jacket. Let's see. So we got some questions. Here we are. What recommendations do you have for new writers? Seems everyone wants to charge money for something, but what is worth paying for and what isn't is the question.
She's talking about buying a book?
She's talking about you're a beginning writer, you don't have anything. Should you pay for an editor? What services do you, as somebody who has nothing, sort of need to expect to pay for?
I would definitely. I worked with a freelance editor for One Rough Man.
Okay.
And it was the best. I didn't have any. I couldn't afford it because they're kind of expensive. And so she was actually English, and her father was a British military officer, and she took pity on me. And so she said, if you give me some percentage of your first contract for your books, then I'll help you. And for me, 0% of zero is zero. It didn't cost me anything. So it was the best money I ever spent. She's still making money off Run North Man. I would highly recommend getting a freelance editor because there's only so many things your friends can. I mean, I had my friends read it, things like that. There's only so much they can do. They don't work in the industry. They don't know the nuances and things like that. So it was very helpful for me.
Have you had the same agent, same editorial team, your publisher from beginning to end?
I had the same agent, but I'm on a different publisher now.
Okay.
So both Hunter Killer and American Trader was Morrow, and before I was with Dutton.
Oh, sure. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. And you were, for a while, doing 2 books a year, too. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I was going to ask, is that even a sustainable?
It is sustainable for a good friend of mine, Mark Greene, who writes thriller books, writes the Gray Man series, and was also doing Tom Clancy. He's been doing 2 books a year, 2 separate series for a long time. I don't know how he keeps it up. I did it for about 4 years, and it just about broke me in half. The last one was, in fact, Days of Rage, and I remember telling my wife, I'm not going to finish this. There's no way.
Mm-hmm.
I'd already been to Istanbul and to Bulgaria and done all the research for it, but I was just burned out. And my editor called me and said, hey, we want to go back to one book a year because you're kind of cannibalizing your own sales. So if you're doing 2 books a year, one of them's Tom Clancy, one of them's a Gray Man, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing 2 books a year in a series, the hardback's coming out before the paperback's ever going to make it on the shelf and you're chewing yourself up.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's fine with me. Couldn't come at a better time.
Uh-huh. So you're in an every January pattern now, is that right?
Roughly, yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes it's February, sometimes it's January, sometimes it's in December. I don't know who's doing the chicken bone roll and that stuff, but generally that's where it is.
So are you researching and writing the 2022 book right now,
Yes.
or is that?
Yes. Just started. Well, I'm supposed to be in Croatia right now, but COVID's destroyed that. I got to figure out what I'm going to do.
Well, that was where I was headed. Hard to be boots on the ground during a global pandemic, so that's got to change the pattern a little bit.
Well, and actually for American Trader, I usually, I'll just shift it forward a year when I'm writing the book. So we went to Taiwan and all over Australia and did the research on it, and then I was writing it, and then COVID hit. And I'm like, well, how do I reflect that in the book? How's this going to work? Because Pike's not going to be able to do a surveillance operation when everybody's locked in our houses. The only person going to be on the streets is a bad guy and him. It's not, and you can't globetrot if no planes are flying.
Yes.
And so I said it was about the elections in Taiwan anyway. So I said, I'm going to set it right during the elections, right before COVID hit. And said, I'm not even going to deal with COVID because there's just no way to tell how to do that. Now I have to figure it out. I mean, some parts are good. So like if you're doing something in England, one of the problems I had when I was running around England is they've got cameras everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. So if you're going to do a takedown in London, you got to figure out a spot you can do it where there's not any cameras. And that takes a lot of research because they're all over the place. Well, now with COVID, everybody's wearing masks. So I could wear a mask, sunglasses, and a hat. And I could do it right then, and you'd have no idea who I am. And I could get away. On the other hand, it's kind of hard to fly when the planes are flying. So I got to figure that out.
How do you, to sort of widen the lens on that as well, how do you balance the need for the book to be happening in a particular moment and a particular time, but also for it to sort of be timeless, for Pike not to be 10 years older now than he was in One Rough Man?
Well, what I've decided, I talked to Robert Crace about this because he writes the Elvis Cole series of novels and love those. And when Robert Crace first started writing those, The Monkey's Raincoat, way back when, Elvis Cole was a Vietnam veteran. Well, now, if he was still a Vietnam veteran, he'd be in a wheelchair chasing these guys around. And I said, how'd you deal with that? And he said, well, I just quit writing about Vietnam, and I decided he's like Superman. Superman never ages. And so I said, that's good advice. That's what Pike and Jennifer are doing. So although the presidential administration will change over, commanders will move on, new team members will come in, old team members will leave, they're just not going to get older until I say so anyway.
Until that becomes necessary for the plot, right? Then you write it in.
But then, that's what we were talking about before. Then your universe just shrank down. Because you've done something you can never take back.
You've mentioned a couple writers that you have formed personal relationships with. And I'm always curious about sort of communities of writers. Even if you're not reading within your own genre necessarily, are there other folks who do special ops thrillers or military thrillers that are sort of in your circle that you interact with?
Not really. It took me for the longest time to even tell people I was a writer. I was kind of embarrassed. I think it was book 7 when I finally said, no, okay, I'm a writer. I was just telling him I'm a security consultant because I was still doing a lot of contracting. But I met Mark Greene. He's a good friend of mine. He's just a good dude. So I became friends with him just because he's a nice guy, not because he's a writer. I met him at a conference, and then we went and signed books at SHOT Show in Las Vegas together, and we had a good time and became good friends. But I don't really, I talk to people all the time, obviously. In fact, a lot of times authors will send me something saying, can you fact check this for me? Is this okay? But I don't ever, for me, writing is kind of a solitary thing. I write and then I give it to my editor. Because, everybody's got an opinion. If I give it to some other writers, they're going to say, I wouldn't do this. I would do that. Well, that doesn't really matter. The editor's the only one that counts. So I just tend to write my own stuff.
But you've got voices that you trust, even if they're not from other writers. There are folks.
Well, I have operators that read it, definitely. So, I've got military people that read it just to make sure that, number one, I'm not saying anything I shouldn't, because one of the hardest things is there's only so many ways to skin a cat. And while I make something up, which has happened in the past, I've made up something because I know we don't have this. Well, it turns out we do have it now, and we're using it. So take that out. Who told you about this? I was like, well, I kind of made it up. So, but I'll take it out and go back the old way then. And I had some real strong female people I'd served with in the military. They really helped with Jennifer. So I first wrote Jennifer, you know, it was like, give her a spine. She's a crybaby. So I rewrite her, and they say, she's not a man. Come on. So
you had to dial it back a little
Right.
bit. It's kind of split the difference.
Right.
Yeah. Mhm. How long can these characters go on? Are you dedicated to this as long as there's interest for you as writer, for readers, for that
yeah,
sweet spot of that combination?
exactly. So as long as people want to keep reading, I'll keep writing. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I've been asked about standalones for like Aaron and Shoshana or a couple of Mossad assassins.
Mhm.
They're actually in American or in Hunter Killer,
Mhm.
but they aren't an American traitor. And some people are like, oh, I was going to kill them. They first came in Days of Rage, and they were write-offs. I mean, I was going to have them do all this stuff, and the end of it, boom, they're both dead. And I liked them too much.
Mm.
So I just kind of threw them on a shelf and said, you know, I'll let them ride off in the sunset. And then I was writing Insider Threat, which is about ISIS, and I had to have a character in Jordan doing some kind of stuff, and I started creating one out of whole cloth, and I was like, I got those two people sitting on the shelf. Let me throw them back in here. And I got all kinds of emails. Hey, they're back. And I'm like, good thing I didn't kill them. So some people say, you know, hey, maybe you should do a standalone with those two. And, you know, maybe I will someday. I don't know.
Mhm. Is there anything else that's sort of outside the Pike Logan universe that you would love to write, given the opportunity?
No, because the good thing about writing is it's just all wide open. So I can make, it would be a theme versus a character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so whatever the theme is, I can design a book around Pike to do that.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the Insider Threat was about a bunch of guys from America went over and trained with ISIS. And there's a huge theme about these kids or you know, what's it like to grow up like this? And you're starting to get twisted up inside this cult, basically. Now I wrote about the White House down in Florida where they beat the kids and all that's where they were from. And so it's a private school that was down there. And so I want to explore that. And I can do that somehow or another. I just said, well, I'll throw in with ISIS. And so if there's a theme that I want to explore, I'm pretty sure I could figure out a way for Pike to get in there and do it.
So he is the sort of toolkit that you can use to solve the problem
Right.
that you find in your
Well,
research
actually,
and your
for instance, the Polaris Protocol, which is the second 2-book-a-year thing, I told my editor, if we're going to do 2 books a year, then I can't be saving the world every book. It's got to be something less than that.
Yeah.
And so that was more personal with Jennifer trying to find her brother, who's a newspaper reporter down in the Mexican drug cartels. So it was going to be more of a murder mystery, basically. Let's get this guy. And I discovered a glitch with the GPS constellation. I got to go to Schreiber Air Force Base and see where they fly all the GPS stuff and everything. And it turned into a saving the world thing because I'm like, holy moly, that is a critical infrastructure. Most people don't know it, but GPS, people think of it, tells me where I am.
Mm.
Really, it tells you where you are because there's 2 satellites shooting signals down to you, and the timing is so precise on those, it can tell you where you are. But because that timing is so precise and it's free, it's used everywhere. Stock trades, it's in there. When you talk on your phone, your voice is split up into a bazillion pieces and put back together by the GPS signal. Credit cards at the gas station are used by the GPS signal.
Mm.
So if you took the GPS out, yeah, you wouldn't be able to navigate, but there would be a whole lot of damage done because people just use that timing signal for all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up looking up being Save the World thing. Instead, that's just the one I had set out to write.
Yeah. So it started out with a sort of personal lens, but
Yeah.
it sort of grew from there.
Yeah.
You know? That's the Hardy Boys model, right? I mean, that's sort of when you start out, they've got this small sort of personal case and it expands over the course of the novel. Speaking of mysteries, you know, the sort of most famous moment of somebody sort of a writer getting so angry at their character, sort of feeling so trapped they had to make them go away, Arthur Conan Doyle, who kills off Sherlock Holmes and the problem, and then sort of realizes, maybe I'm not done with him. The readers certainly weren't done with him.
Yeah.
Got brought him back as well. But we mentioned Superman a couple of times in this too. And you sort of have that issue with Pike, not just in terms of his agelessness, but in creating a problem that's big enough
Right.
to need Pike Logan to step in too. So are you always sort of thinking in that way too? How does this escalate?
No, I kind of 50-50. Like No Fortunate Son we were talking about, that's very personal. It's politicians' kids are getting kidnapped by the Irish Republican Army. The IRA in Ireland, but it's real personal because Kurt's niece is taken, and it's just a personal, I'm going to go solve this problem, not I'm saving the world. So it all depends on what I'm writing at the time. Sometimes the saving the world thing is it's hard to get all that into a cohesive whole, and sometimes it's not as satisfying. I mean, it's more satisfying to rescue the niece than it is to, stop stop Dr. Evil from setting off a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, understandably too. It feels more immediate, more personal, and it's probably something that the reader can relate to more directly as well.
Right.
There would be some sort of equivalent moment where they too have to make a decision, right or wrong, act or don't act. Mm-hmm. And that it's easier to relate to something that feels more human than something that's always global, always happening on that grand scale.
Like I wrote Ghosts of War, which is basically a global, it's Russia fighting NATO. It's more of a grand tapestry thing. Mm-hmm. But you have to have the human component in there. And to do that was really hard to do. So I had the Rangers jumping in. Well, I was told solely through the eyes of a single Ranger on the ground doing everything. So the reader's viscerally feeling what's going on. Mm-hmm. And it's not just a description of planes flying in and doing all this kind of stuff. And I had a Ranger buddy of mine that read it all. Named the character after him. So he's in there. He retired as Sergeant Major, but he's a PFC in the book.
Yeah, well, that's not a bad thank you. That's nice. So I had another question that I don't want to overlook, and it circles back around to the fact that we're doing this not only as part of the Conroy Festival, but also as a part of the Friends of South Carolina Libraries. How have libraries impacted your writing and reading life?
Oh, yeah. Well, we were talking about it earlier. Obviously, libraries that's where I spent all my time as a kid. You could get the little pass from the teacher, and you could go in the library and check out a bunch of books. Mm-hmm. And I had a nice school, a public school, but if you were reading, they would give you the time to go read. If you were goofing off, then you get back to the classroom. But if you went to the library and started reading, they let you sit there and read. And so I did a ton of reading. But writing these books, we were talking earlier, I don't have an office now. Mm-hmm. So I've written sections of all these books in the Charleston County Library, the College of Charleston Library, the Mount Pleasant Library. I've been to all of them. And because they have free Wi-Fi and they got to plug in too, and nobody's bugging you.
Yes, they are great resources in the community. Charleston County Library just opened up another one too. So even in this time of COVID, in time of pandemic, libraries continue to be a resource that's being added to rather than subtracted from in Charleston and elsewhere. There actually is one question about your jacket, which I understand has some kind of history to it as
people
well.
Get confused.
Yes.
Where's it on?
It may be in a flap.
This is my author jacket.
Your author jacket.
Comes out once a year. Yes. It was usually on book tour, but now I'm not doing a book tour. So I'm here, so I'm going to wear my author jacket.
Yeah.
But people confuse it with the one on the back of my book. So I had this leather jacket on the back of the book that people always ask me, where can I get that jacket? Mm-hmm. And I have no idea because I did a shoot, with a professional photographer, and I came in with a ton of clothes, changed into 14 different outfits. And right before I'm leaving, he says, hey, try this jacket on. It's just hanging there from the last guy who rented the studio. Yes. And so I put the jacket on. He took the picture, and that's what ended up on the book. And I hung the jacket back up and walked out. I mean, I know the make or model of it is. Yes. So people always say, how can you get that jacket? I don't know.
It was taken during the 5 minutes that you and the jacket were together, and that's the extent of the story.
Yeah. But it's not this jacket. It's more of a motorcycle jacket. So this is my author jacket.
Very nice. Author jacket. I like that. Jason Mott, an author from North Carolina, told me the story of his author photo as well. He showed up, and the photographer said, yeah, you're not wearing that. We're going to switch clothes. So he's actually wearing the photographer's clothes in his author photo. There may be all sorts of behind-the-scenes stories of author photos that we never get to hear that are interesting like that. We've got just a few minutes left, so with our time, I don't see any other questions from our audience. So I want to mention that you're actually going to be back here another time today for a panel that we're doing from 5 to 6. Before we were writers, so Brad will be joined by 3 other writers who used to do sort of not so writerly things, including former FBI agent Dana Ridenour from right here in Beaufort, Stephanie Austin Edwards, who is had a really wonderful career for about 20 years on Broadway and theater and is now part of our writing community here in Beaufort as well. And Dorothy St. James is actually in the back teaching a workshop right now to talk about what she did before becoming both a romance writer and a mystery writer. And that's from 5 to 6, also today, Friday. So we'll be right back here on our Facebook Live feed and also back in the Zoom room again. So Brett, I want to thank you so much for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
For being part of the festival and for telling us a little bit about Pike Logan and all things from that universe. And congratulations on the great success of the book.
Thank you.
And the series. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody in the Zoom room. We appreciate your time. See you all, hopefully, later today. Take care.